Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology Podcast. I'm Graham Doran along with my co host, Kerry Miller. And let's go ahead and get right into it. We're here in championship week, conference tournament season. We're getting these final bids sewed up. Also, trying to do a little bit of seeding, but for the most part, that's already been wrapped up for the various teams across the country. Let's start on the seeding side. The number one seeds are pretty much done. Purdue, Houston, UConn, we can all agree are going to be number one seeds. But that last spot, for a while, it seemed like it was going to be Tennessee versus Arizona versus North Carolina. Arizona's maybe fallen off a little bit. So are we thinking it's down to UNC versus Tennessee? And if so, how do you determine who's that last number one seed right now, UNC versus Tennessee?
Yeah, I think it is UNC or Tennessee. I'm getting a delivery here from a smoothie. Yeah, I think Arizona's probably out at this point, barring some chaos where Tennessee and North Carolina both lose early and Arizona looks just dominant in the Pac-12 tournament. Where'd my trash can go? I don't know. Throwing that on the floor. It was funny when we were at the mock. I love and respect Dave Almond, but he kept suggesting, like, do you think the committee would, if it's even close, would they want to put Arizona as the one in the West just because they're the West team? I was like, I kept telling him, like, no, if anything, they'd want them as the five overall for bracket region balance purposes. Like, it'd be great if they were the two out West. So I think it's Tennessee, North Carolina, and I think oddly enough, the timing of the championship games is massive here. If North Carolina beats Duke for a third time, I think they're that fourth number one seed, regardless of what Tennessee does, because historically we've seen the Sunday games do not matter at all. They can say that they have their contingency brackets, and we can argue that sometimes the Saturday games, even some of the Friday games, don't matter. But we have plenty of evidence that shows, especially in the SEC, that championship game doesn't matter. So I think if North Carolina pulls ahead, even if Tennessee were to beat Kentucky or Alabama, I don't know, I'm not even sure how the bracket lines up, what's even possible for a championship matchup there, but I don't think it would be enough for them to move ahead of a North Carolina team with a 3-game sweep of the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee's beloved Blue Devils.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring up Tennessee because I agree with you. That's the team that really rings in from a couple years ago when, to me, they had done enough to be a number one seed, and they didn't even jump Duke in 2022 for the last two seed
Mm-hmm.
because they did all their work during championship week. So I think that was the perfect example. If they're not going to bump that Duke team down for that Tennessee team, really need to do your work beforehand. But I do think the committee spends a lot of time on that Saturday night of making sure the one seeds are exactly where they want them to be. And I agree with you. I think if UNC, they already have a clear separation with Duke. They're 2 games ahead of Duke. They got the sweep over Duke. Both are really strong road teams, Tennessee and North Carolina. Both have really strong resume metrics. UNC has the head to head, but that was at home. So I don't put a ton of credence in it. I don't think the committee would. But for me, that big thing is exactly what you mentioned. If North Carolina can already have all 3 wins against Duke sewn up by that time Saturday night, and they went 17-3 in the regular season in the ACC, I think either you could look at North Carolina and say, well, they still don't have quite as strong of wins as Tennessee. And I would agree with that. But they would have had such a clear separation between them and any other team in the ACC that I think that would just be enough for the committee, considering they were fifth overall at the reveal.
Yeah, I agree. That is good to note that UNC was ahead of the reveal, and we did our whole pod after that, kind of questioning why the heck that was that UNC was at five. Kind of thought at the time it was just a case, at least I did, that they took the 6 power conference projected champions, and then UNC's head-to-head win over Tennessee was kind of the tiebreaker there. But I do right now have Tennessee as my fourth number one. But I think if North Carolina wins the ACC tournament and it comes against Duke in the championship game, which that matchup has only happened in the title game once in the last 20 years, which I find bizarre. It happened in 2011. That was it. So who knows if both teams will play nice and give us that third showdown that will get publicized to no end by ESPN for sure. But if UNC gets that matchup and wins it, I think they're the one. Short of that, I think it's probably Tennessee.
Yeah, I think historically, if you look back, the committee really does, on the one line at least, pay attention to those Saturday night championship games. They move those teams around because it's an easy scrub at that point, right? They've already spent so much time talking about the one seed. It's simply oh, Duke just won the ACC tournament with Zion, one seed, put them at overall number one, you know? It's an easy move there. I think it's when you start having that Tennessee situation from 2022 where it's like, hey, this team and Duke's, I think, 2018, if I remember right. Those were two examples of teams that really probably could have moved up to a number one seed if the committee wanted to, but it was just too much work done during championship week to scrub that far up the list. I remember Duke got stopped by Arizona in scrubbing. The committee chairman talked about that Arizona, when they got up there, they were like, no, let's just keep Arizona. And that's why I think the scrubbing process is so important and why I try to mimic it during this week is because setting that initial seed list exactly where you think the committee has them at that given time, that's really important because from then on you're just scrubbing. And if you did a complete brand new reevaluation of these teams, you'd
Hmm.
probably come to different conclusions about where they stand. But that scrubbing process, it's very easy to say no. It's very easy to be like, I'm not sure they've done enough. How many times have we done the mock carry and somebody's gone, I'm not sure they've done enough. And it's like, well, I mean, let's get into it. Like, why is this team still above this team? But that's just not human nature. There's simply this, it's not that big of a result that just people tend to lean on that. So I think if North Carolina for me is fourth overall versus Tennessee fifth overall at this time, which I think they are, just based on how much respect the committee gave them at the time of the reveal. I think UNC is going to hold that if they win the ACC tournament. I don't think the committee would look at Tennessee winning the SEC tournament and think that's enough to move past North Carolina. But this really could potentially come down to where does the committee have them tomorrow evening when they get
Hmm.
together and set that. If one of them is fourth and the other's fifth, they might just stick with that unless one of them wins the tournament and the other doesn't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're more adamant about trying to stick to that schedule than I am. I'm slammed with everything that I'm doing. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I don't even care what the committee's doing and when, but that's a good point. I mean, if I could, I would try and mimic their timeline because it is important. I mean, we talked about that with the reveal that, when the data is pulled, when they're looking at the matrix, what's been refreshed and what hasn't, you know, we was North Carolina's KPI correct when they were looking at the data after that loss to Syracuse? I think that may have been an interesting difference if they had just looked at it a day later. I don't know, but yeah, I think it's up in the air. I lean Tennessee mostly because I had them ahead of. I thought if they had beaten Kentucky on Saturday, they were going to be a lock, no matter what happened during championship week. And I don't think losing by 4 to Kentucky, even though, concurrently UNC won at Duke, I really don't think that was enough for me to move them down. Kind of like what you're saying with, was that enough for a change? Where I already had them at the 4. I'm kind of inclined to keep them there, but I'm not going to argue with you having North Carolina 4. I think it could go either way.
Yeah, very, very much a toss up. I don't think it's a, clearly the committee's going to do this. I think really reasonably different minds could come to a different conclusion. And I don't want to say it's a coin flip because I think every bracketologist, for whatever reason, you're going to find that one thing that
Hmm.
for you is just that difference maker. And for me, it's the fact North Carolina went 17-3 in the ACC. I just think that's such a dominant run through really one of the power conferences. We can all talk about the ACC being down, but these committee members are half of them are from power conferences. Half of them, who knows how much basketball experience they have, but they know the ACC's reputation. I think the reputation of the ACC could help out North Carolina here because the SEC only did an 18 game conference schedule. The ACC did an extra 2 games. And I think the fact that North Carolina is 17-3 in their league versus 14-4 in Tennessee's, just visually, that could be appealing to some of the committee members.
And certainly one of those committee members, UNC AD Bubba Cunningham. If anybody's going to be able to share plenty of data on why they should be a 1 seed, it'll be them. I think you're kind of bogarting the conversation on Kansas during the mock kind of proved that if there's a little bit of a bias involved, it can come through in a big way, even if we try and be as unbiased as we possibly can. And he won't be allowed to vote on it, but he can talk to them before that and kind of try and sway them during their dinner breaks and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it might not even be him trying to sway, but there's this natural, you know more about
Hmm.
your team than anybody else does. So, like, that's in the committee, the mock committee with Kansas. I'd hear a lot of these things and be like, but I know the story about that, right? Like, because I know what was behind all of those games, like the various situations. And that's where I think one of the most influencing things in the committee room can be somebody that's from the same conference or the conference specialist, the person assigned to monitor that conference as the conference monitor. They can carry a lot of weight because they know things about these teams that the other committee members simply won't know. And will that person be persuasive? Is a big question. So that's the part we don't know, is who are the most persuasive voices in the room, because somebody might inherently, they just might be the personality that doesn't want to speak up a whole lot. Others might be the ones that want to dominate conversation. That actually can sway votes.
But enough about Rocco and Shelby. Let's move on to some other topic.
Moving on, let's go over to the Mountain West. I think the Mountain
Okay.
West is really fascinating. I spent a ton of time looking at overall seeds 19 to 30 as I was going through making my seed list this week, and I have to tell you, I was less confident in it than pretty much ever. I just got there and I was like, how are some of these teams 5 seeds and some are 8 seeds when they look so similar? And it is so hard to get a discrepancy between these resumes. And the Mountain West in particular was very difficult for me. Let's talk about 4 teams at the top of the Mountain West. I think we agree. UNLV is probably out right now. New Mexico's right on that bubble, and Colorado State's probably high bubble, not locked into the field, but in good shape.
Yep.
So let's go to talk about San Diego State, who was 14th at the committee bracket reveal. Utah State, who won the outright Mountain West regular season title, Nevada, who has a true road win at Utah State, and then Boise State, who had an impressive sweep of San Diego State. How do you look at those 4 teams and rank them?
Yeah, I still have San Diego State at the top, even though they ended up what, fifth or maybe even sixth in the conference standings. Went 11-7, really kind of limped to the finish line, but like you said, they were 14 in the reveal, and I mean, yeah, they had some losses, but it's not like they took any terrible losses down the stretch. So, yeah, it like you were saying, from 19 to 30, I think it's 19 to 33, right? I think there's a clear top 17. I think pretty much everybody has South Carolina at 18. Oddly enough, just that's the point where you almost have to slot them in, and then it gets really tough. And then up until that last, excuse me, the first 9 seed, which I still have Nebraska, even though I think they're 99.9% in. I just don't want to put more than 32 locks in case just complete all hell breaks loose in conference tournaments. But I think 33 is kind of where we have that interesting cut. And it is these 4 Mountain West teams that kind of drive the whole conversation. Yeah, I have San Diego State at the top of that tier, still as a 5 seed. Nevada at 23 overall, Utah State at 25. I could go really either way on those teams. Certainly Nevada having that head to head. They only played once, which Steve Alford made sure to let us know at the end of the season that Utah State's outright title may have been different if they had played 2 games against Nevada. But I think having that head to head win and it coming on the road, even though Utah State got the outright title, kind of makes a pretty big difference. Nevada certainly also did more in non-conference play. I understand why Utah State didn't do much other than play like Bradley and San Francisco and what was their other UC Irvine, and even that one was at home. whereas Nevada won at Washington, beat TCU in that Diamond Head Classic. I think that pushes them ahead, even without the regular season title. And then where do I have Boise State? They're at the top of my 8 line. So 29 overall. 4 Quad 1A wins. It's tempting to put them higher, but I think just that's where I landed. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, this was really difficult. Like, I kept looking for differences between these teams. I wrote it out in every possible way I could think of. And ultimately, some teams swept other teams. One won the only game, and it happened to be a road game, but it all kind of went circularly, where there was no real differentiator between these teams in a fair way, right? There might be some things where it's like, okay, San Diego State's quad one record isn't very good, but they don't have any losses outside of quad one, and
Hmm.
that's that. So you get a team like Utah State. I think what it did it for me. So I ended up with Utah State 20th, San Diego State 21st, and Nevada 22nd. And the reason why I think I had them that close is one, I think very similar resumes, but Utah State at the top. I think just when we look at the committee, historically, they tend to reward a regular season title, and just maybe give like the ever so slight bump up the seed list for that. So I think I wanted to reward Utah State for that. But the other thing that they did do is you mentioned maybe not a lot of quality in the out of conference, but they put together an awesome overall record. 5 losses on the season. I think, and I'm not talking about West play, just in general over the course of a season, that is such a strong overall record that I think that will catch some of the committee members' attention. They'll say regular season title and awesome overall record, even if maybe some of their efficiency metrics are a little bit sketchy and they lost at home to Nevada. Maybe that's the thing that puts them over. San Diego State, I had right ahead of Nevada because even though Nevada has that really terrific win at Utah State, and they've been great against Quadrant One, whereas San Diego State has been poor against Quad One generally. I think this committee really showed they valued San Diego State's clean team sheet at the
Hmm.
reveal. And if they're still valuing that, I'm not sure they're going to value Nevada having that loss to Wyoming. I think that could be an issue for them. That's just that kind of like pockmark on the resume that San Diego State doesn't have. I think it's ultimately going to come down to the Mountain West tournament. Which of these three teams performs the best is going to be the most highly seeded. I think it's more interesting on whether you get to does that tournament winner get a 5 seed, or maybe are they stuck at a 6 seed? I think that's a question mark. Is where's the Mountain West in general going to be seeded? And I think you could definitely make an argument that some of these teams aren't really 6 seed material or 5 seed material. Even maybe they're more like 7 seeds. I don't agree with that. Obviously, if I have Utah State 20th, San Diego State 21st, and Nevada 22nd, but I could definitely see the committee having these teams lower than that. I do think Boise doesn't really belong with the rest of the group, even though they have that sweep of San Diego State. Again, another team with a great Quadrant One record, but I just don't think they've had the general quality behind the team sheet that the rest of these teams have.
I I pretty well agree with all that. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit different on the order, but it is a toss up. For most of the season, I was in the same boat. I think at one point, all 4 of my 6 seeds were from the Mountain West. Like it's been very hard to separate. They just keep handing each other quality wins and okay losses. I think I mostly ended up with San Diego State and Nevada ahead just because of the non-conference wins. I mentioned what Nevada did. San Diego State also won at Gonzaga by 10, which the last time Gonzaga lost by 10 at the Kennel was in December 2012 to Illinois. Like that's a massive win. Like even at the time when Gonzaga was probably not going to be a tournament team, that was a huge win. And now that they're maybe going to be a 5 seed if they win tonight, that'd be huge. It may well come down to San Diego State versus Gonzaga for the last 5 seed, and there they have that head to head, which I think would be massive. Um, but I do agree that if the winner is San Diego State, Nevada, or Utah State, probably going to be a 5 seed. And I don't think Boise State can get there.
Yeah, I think to your point about San Diego State, that's ultimately was a thing that helped with that discussion against Nevada is not just the road win at Gonzaga, but the St. Mary's neutral court
Yeah.
win. And I really struggled with the fact that San Diego State got swept by Boise and they have 0 wins against the top 6 teams in the Mountain West away from home. But Gonzaga and St. Mary's out of conference. So I guess for me, it was one of those where, like, yeah, really rough what you did in conference compared to some of these other teams, but those games still count, and Gonzaga has really come on at the end of the season. So let's move to the bubble. Spend kind of our last 10 minutes here talking about a few teams in particular that I think are just really interesting to rate. What do you feel about Colorado? Are they in or out right now?
I think they're in. I'm just updating my spreadsheet really quick. Yeah, I have them as my fourth to last in. And that surprised me when I was going through, because when we were at the mock, whatever, 10 days ago, it was very clear to me Utah was ahead of Colorado. Obviously, that changed in a big way over the final week in that road trip to Oregon for both of the Mountain West or the Mountain State boys. But I didn't think Colorado really had any argument to be in. And when they won at Oregon and everybody was like, "Oh, and now they're surely in." I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" And now I look at the data and yeah, I find it hard to make an argument for them to be out. I mean, I pulled my data yesterday morning and I won't update it because I don't want to sway myself, but they were, aside from BPI, which, hates the elevation teams, top 42 and everything. Even BPI, they were 52. So had an average around like 36. I mean, it's really hard to leave those teams out unless they give you a strong reason. Now, I know Colorado does not have great wins. They got destroyed in both losses to Arizona. The Miami win in non-conference play, we thought at the time was going to be huge. Obviously, the Hurricanes just absolutely crashed and burned. Didn't help the Buffaloes at all there. But I think they, 9-9 against quads 1 and 2, when a lot of these bubble teams are like, Michigan State's 8-13 in those games. I think that 9-9 kind of stands out.
Yeah, I agree. I have Colorado in the same exact spot actually as my top of the teams going to Dayton, and I think it's less about what Colorado has done recently, although those road wins helped. It's more about what some of the other bubble teams around them have done. Some teams just weren't taking advantage of opportunities, so Colorado, just by doing what was required, I think moved up that seed list. Definitely not safe, still in danger, but I think in the tournament right now. A team that I also have in and right next to them is Michigan State. I think Michigan State's in more danger than most bracketologists believe. I see a lot of people still have them as a 9 or a 10 seed. I
Yeah.
don't see it. I have them in Dayton as my third to last team in. That loss volume concerns me, but also the number of opportunities they've had to pick up quality wins I find concerning. Where do you have the Spartans?
I have them in the exact same spot. I have them playing Colorado in Dayton. I think that's in my bracket. They would be playing Gonzaga as the 6th seed in the Midwest region or something. I don't know how specific you want me to get with where I have them, but yeah, I agree. They are not safe. I think for them to be top 20 in the predictive metrics makes it really hard for them to be left out, though. I think that's why, we've had this, there's been a narrative in recent years where your result based metrics is what gets you in and your predictive metrics is what gets you seeded. I don't really think there's much to that. I think a lot of people are buying too much into that with Michigan State. Now I know I've drastically promoted Gonzaga in the past few weeks, but I think they've proven they're a better team. I think they actually back up their metrics, whereas Michigan State does not. You really have to question how much of that is still, the preseason data baked in, because at no point has Michigan State really looked like a top 20 team outside of like a 2-week stretch in December when they blew out Baylor and kind of went on a bit of a winning streak there. But then in Big Ten play, they just did not back it up at all. So I think they're very much on the bubble. I forget who they even play in their Big Ten opener. I don't even know if it's decided yet because they got double buys and all that whatnot. But I think if they were to lose right away, they might be out.
Yeah, I think the loss volume would certainly be difficult to overcome. That said, they do have a very similar resume to Michigan in 2022, which landed an 11 seed and avoided Dayton. That said, that Michigan team played a more difficult non-conference schedule than Michigan State, even though Michigan State played a difficult non-conference schedule, and the Big Ten was better. So I think it was just easier when you had a stronger Big Ten to put up one of those records, and Michigan State hasn't had the benefit of a stronger Big Ten. So certainly in some trouble, I believe. Moving on, let's talk about St. John's. How do you feel about the Red Storm?
St. John's is my first team out, and that is still projecting Richmond and South Florida as the auto bids for the AAC and A10. So if, Dayton and FAU win, good news for St. John's. There's room in the field for you. But I do think it's very weird that a week ago we were all saying, they're going to have to do something in the Big East tournament to get in. And then they beat Georgetown and DePaul, and now all of a sudden, like 104 out of 108 bracketologists on the Matrix have them in. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I know Wake Forest lost to, was it Virginia Tech got stomped? Obviously, Utah, we already mentioned them, fell apart. But really, like, what? What did the Johnnies do in the last week to give it? They didn't even beat Georgetown well either. I think that was like a 10-point win. They should have won that game by 30. So it's really weird. They were 58.5 in the result-based metrics when I pulled my data yesterday. And if you'll recall from a month or so ago when we did our little trivia thing, the worst result-based metrics average to get an at-large bid was 57.5, Rutgers 2 years ago. And I don't think St. John's quality of wins is anywhere near as strong as Rutgers was 2 years ago. So, I have them close. That's more so a matter of the bubble sucking right now than them being deserving.
Yeah, I agree with St. John's being in the position they're in has more to do with other teams not following through on their opportunities than St. John's. And I'm looking at that Seton Hall quarterfinal game at the Big
Yes.
East tournament. I'm not convinced that's enough. I look at what St. John's has done in quad one. Is Seton Hall neutral court really going to move that needle much? I
It's
don't
not
know
a
that it
neutral
does.
court.
Yeah, it is not a neutral court. That's definitely another consideration there. So they wouldn't even get the benefit. I mean, I think either way, it's quad two based on where Seton Hall is in the net. But I think that win wouldn't really help from the away from home standpoint. But more than anything, when Villanova's looking worse, Seton Hall's or St. John's resume is
Hmm.
looking worse. I think it's a very, very hollow resume. And I think you could potentially see, and just imagine how mad people will get about this if it happens, but I think you could potentially see St. John's beat Seton Hall in the quarterfinal, and Seton Hall still gets in, St. John's left out. I think that could actually happen.
It's plausible. I have Seton Hall 39 overall, so they're my second to last 10. I have St. John's out, and yeah, I mean, one result, even though it is a big one for both teams, I mean, maybe it only drops Seton Hall a spot or two and only promotes St. John's a spot or two. And there's some bid thieves. And yeah, we've seen it before where we tell ourselves that I think it's usually the 8-9 game of either the Big Ten or the ACC that just feels like it's the winner gets in, the loser gets left out, and doesn't always go that way.
Yep. Let's turn our attention to Indiana State, a team that lost a tough game against Drake in the Missouri Valley tournament final. Where do you see Indiana State? Do you have them in right now, and do you think they could hold on to that spot if so?
I do have them as my last team in. I'm skeptical that they'll hang on to it. It helps a lot that James Madison won the Sun Belt tournament. So now that's really the only, mid-major team that we're talking about. Drake and James Madison punched their tickets. Hopefully, Grand Canyon and McNeese win their tournaments. Princeton as well, although I don't think, even though I have them on the list here, I don't think they're really an at-large candidate. But if it gets to a point where Indiana State is that only team sitting there with, a 21 wins better than 500 type of record, I think that goes in their favor. I think to some extent, the committee is very familiar with Robbie Avila and how good Indiana State's offense is, and they're going to get talked about a lot. So I think that that'll help. And what you were saying before about the whole scrubbing process, will we get to a point if Indiana State is in right now? You know, maybe a St. John's win over Seton Hall does enough if they're right there, but does I have Villanova as my fourth team out? Does Villanova beating DePaul and then whoever the heck they play after that do enough to get them above Indiana State when they're going to have 9 more losses than Indiana State? I doubt it. So I think they're just barely in now, and it's more so a question of bid thieves than the bubble getting the best of them.
Yeah, I agree. Indiana State's currently my last team in the bracket. Let's do one more team and then let's wrap up for today. Texas A&M. How are you feeling about
Yes.
the?
Yes, give me a chance to talk about my 10 seed Aggies. I've gone nuts with Texas A&M, and it's not because I'm like blown away by their season-ending win at Ole Miss, although that was a nice win. The Rebels are not going to be a tournament team. That resume has just gotten so nice. If we're still considering Villanova, right, with 14 losses, way worse results-based metrics, and 3 quad 3 losses, I feel like Texas A&M has to be pretty comfortably ahead of at least Villanova, because they do have 4 quad 3 losses, but 3 of them are like the top third of quad 3. Like if any of Arkansas or LSU goes on a bit of a run in the SEC tournament, those could become quad 2 losses, and then they don't feel as bad. Although at that point it's late in the the deliberation process, and will that make any difference? But 5 quad 1 wins, 11-9 against quads 1 and 2. I don't think there's any other bubble team that has a winning record against quads 1 and 2. Even Indiana State's only 5-5. If TCU is on the bubble, they're 9-8. I believe that's the only other one. So to be 2 games above 500 against that group is pretty key. Even though if you factor in the quad 3, they're 500 against quads 1 through 3.
Yeah, I agree. And their resume-based metrics actually kind of kept settling a little bit higher and higher up than expected in a good way, more palatable. So that's going to do it for today. We're going to keep doing these as we get closer to Selection Sunday. But thank you again for joining the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. Have a good one.
Take care.